I now call Deputy Derek Nolan, followed by Deputy Jerry Buttimer. Deputy Nolan is 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Les Cancorla. I think we need to acknowledge that we have a serious and growing problem with antisocial behaviour in residential areas. And we have to also acknowledge that the current system simply doesn't work. And it doesn't work because the enforcement of the antisocial behaviour laws we have in the Residential Tenancies Act is difficult, is being implemented very poorly by the PRTB at present, and is simply not capable of being enforced properly by that kind of a body. Many of the issues I get as a local representative, you feel you can help, you feel you can do something, you can advocate. But this is the one issue that occurs time and time again where I feel utterly powerless to help people. People who will come into me with neighbours causing their lives misery, enduring behaviour that's sometimes small but that just accumulates, that has a grinding effect on them, that affects their mental health and their physical health, that affects the community relations, that affects the vibrancy of the neighbourhood, and that completely undermines the quality of life, not just in that person's individual home, but in the entire neighbourhood. And it can all be because of one tenant or one house in that area. I think what's happened, and it's been alluded to in previous discussions in the property market, where we've gone from people basically either owning their own home or being in a local authority home to a small rented sector, to such a plethora of different housing types. We have private owners, private rented as mentioned, we have local authority housing, we have the residential accommodation scheme, we have the long-term leasing scheme, and then we have rent allowance. All these various different types of tenancies and housing models, as a result of which means that we no longer have areas like we used to have in the past where that was a private estate, that was a local authority estate. The different models and different forms of housing provision are spread right across every sector and every area of cities, urban areas, towns, and so on. I'm going to give an example of an area that in Galway, Ballyban. It's an area I grew up in. It has local authority housing that was built in the 1980s and has settled down. It has private residential accommodation that was built. But it has never been given a chance to properly settle, and there's been more local authority housing put in, more private housing during the boom, and has been overpopulated. Coupled with that, it has a third-level institution nearby, and it has suffered all of the problems with antisocial behaviour that are possible to list. It is a microcosm of the problems that we face, and a microcosm of an example of how the current law and the current infrastructure and tools of the law to deal with antisocial behaviour simply doesn't work. One couple that came to me were in their 70s. They were in their house, their private house. The local authority had bought the house next door. Their life was made absolutely hell by behaviour of the children, by intimidation, by car mechanics being operated outside the door, by illegal building, by sheds being built onto their wall, all kinds of behaviour for an elderly couple who were afraid to speak and who were afraid to act and to do anything. Now, they did eventually. They came to me, and they came to other local representatives and to the local authority. But at the end of the day, the solution for that family, that elderly couple, was to move out, was to sell their house and move out, rather than to continue to persist with the other legal avenues, such as antisocial behaviour, working with the local authority. They saw the only way that they could enjoy the last decade, 2 decades, 3 decades of their lives was to leave that property and sell it. And they're now living in private rented accommodation. That's how serious it is. And that's an issue where we have a local authority involved. And there are other issues where where the PRTB are involved, where the service and the action to help those people would not be as good. I can give you so many examples, different people from the areas of Knocknacarra, where people were little things, but it's the accumulative effect of little things that can really impact on people. Rubbish being thrown in the streets, bins being left blocking cars, people blocking them in their driveway, 10 cars parking outside of a house, parties in the night. Any of those individually you would be able to say is an isolated incident, but the cumulative effect on people can be very, very undermining of their confidence and their enjoyment of their home, but also the level of, it's a fear and an intimidation often. And it's just a sense of intimidation, the sense of fear that can so undermine people's lives. And I have to say that when I talk to people, I'm at a loss as to tell them what to do. Because if they go to the PRTB, I have never found anybody who has gotten a successful resolution, in my view, to these kind of issues from the PRTB. If they go, one of the people who came to see me went to see a solicitor, and the solicitor told them, have they 3 brothers that might come along and knock on the door and intimidate them, because that would be quicker, cheaper, and more effective than going on the legal route, which they might not win and would cost them a fortune. So we're down to, and if people in the law sphere are recommending, fight intimidation with intimidation, we're seriously in a very difficult position. I want to acknowledge that there are very good landlords. And when there's a good landlord, you will always find there's no problem. But where you have bad landlords, delinquent landlords, and non-caring landlords, that's when you have the real problem. And it is a factor of the result to changing in the housing model. We have people who went from having very little to owning 20, 25, 30 houses, and it's all for it to make a quick buck. They don't run it as a business. They don't run it with any kind of professionalism. They run it as a way that in 20 years' time, 25 years' time, if they can get anybody in there, doesn't matter who, what, to pay off the mortgage for 25 years, they'll have a vast property portfolio and they can retire comfortably, and that'll be it. So much so that the sole motivator is that the mortgage is paid. So they don't look after the property. They don't paint it. They don't upgrade it. They don't put in new furnishings. Their windows are decaying. All they care about is getting the rent in to pay the mortgage. One neighbour, one person who came to see me in Chantala, the landlord fessed up as much. They said that to them. They don't really care. And the property is then left to decay so much and to decline so much that you're not going to get proper people, or I beg your pardon, you're not going to get people in there to rent the property who will maintain it because it's so degraded. I think that this issue is so big, and so, the sense of powerlessness that it leaves with people further adds to the issue. And I really think that something drastic needs to be done. The PRTB, as I've said, I think the bill is to be very much welcomed, Minister, in what it does. But the PRTB, we're tweaking around the edges of a failed system. And I think the Act of 2004 is quite good in that it lays out what antisocial behaviour is. And it's very broad and it's very effective. What we're missing is enforcement, and is enforcement of those laws. And what we fail to implement in the system and in the law is in my view, and it should be regardless of whether it's owner-occupied or private rented, is that the owners of properties have a responsibility for those properties. And just because you've leased it out to tenants doesn't mean that you can step back and say, look, that's an issue between the tenants and the next-door neighbours. You're the landlord, you're taking the rent, you're responsible for how they behave in the property. And we need to have that value and that principle enshrined. And I think that the ability that we have now, with the proper register of property ownership, a proper analysis for the first time of who owns what properties through the household charge and the property tax, leaves us with an excellent opportunity to enforce the responsibility of owners of properties to those properties. And I would say that when I deal with cases of this, we often talk to the local authority, who has no role if it's not a local authority house. The
2 minutes remaining, Deputy. Go on, Owen.
Thank you. The Gardaí, who have no role if it's not a criminal matter. But we somehow can issue on-the-spot fines for speeding. We issue on-the-spot fines for littering. We issue on-the-spot fines for dumping. And I don't see why we can't issue on-the-spot fines for some of the very simple forms of antisocial behaviour that occur in residential properties, be they owner-occupied or not. And if we know who the owners of those properties are, which we now will do, that fine should be passed on to the landlord, absolutely immediately, without question. And the relationship between landlord and tenant, therefore, should be one where the agreement is between the landlord that that fine is passed on. But the landlord cannot be immune from people's concerns, from neighbours' concerns, from Gardaí concerns as to what's happening, which is what they're doing. They're closing their ears and they're paying no attention. So I think that if we had a system whereby the fine issued to a landlord and the landlord then passed it on to the tenants, we would have the landlord involved, and a landlord would be very quick to act. A landlord who suddenly gets a bill for €80 for a house party, for €100 for nappies being thrown out and into the garden, €100 for blocking someone's house and so on, would be very quick to act and to take their head out of the sand if there's a bill crossing their table. And I think that we can't continue with the current system. Minister, I think that we need a fundamentally different approach to how we deal with this issue. It is growing. It is in certain areas, it is completely destroying the community fabric. You can see it. If you have one house, it affects the next door neighbours. They move out. The same thing happens. They move out. The people a private landlord will come in and rent that out, and the problem spreads. And entire areas of Galway City, I can name the estates, are being vacated of people who just simply cannot live there anymore and are moving out. And then once you have that happening, and you have a kind of a vacated, a place where you do not have the proper social mix, as they call it, between private rented, between owner-occupied, that's when you allow greater things than antisocial behaviour to start. That's when criminality starts to become an issue, and it becomes a haven for certain kinds of activity and so on. And I really think that we need to nip that problem in the bud. We need to just get there quickly with a proper system that just makes landlords and owner-occupiers responsible financially in an easily and enforceable way for antisocial behaviour that occurs in the property that they own, that they're taking benefit from, and that they will be benefiting financially from in the future. And I don't think it's unreasonable to do so. I think that we need a task force between justice and housing to implement such a system, because it's the only way we will actually solve that problem, if we take something radical and something effective to deal with it.
I now call Deputy Jerry Buttimer. Jen Nomad.
Come on, good last concord. I want to welcome the Minister.